The silence had been going on for 11 hours when Callan Rourke decided it was deliberate. He stood at the forward observation rail of the TFS Quiet Meridian, hands folded behind his back, watching the alien formation hold position at 40,000 kilometers. 17 vessels, each one a long ovoid hull of burnished copper with no visible weapons ports, no sensor dishes, no running lights. They hung in the dark like seeds suspended in amber, motionless, broadcasting nothing. 11 hours since they had dropped out of whatever transit method they used. 11 hours since the Meridian sensor officer had choked on her own breath and said 3 words that ended one era and started another. Contact. Multiple contacts. And in all that time, silence, not the silence of absence. The silence of a held breath. Captain Adrian Vasic appeared beside him at the rail. She was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who did not enjoy the work. 26 years in the Terran fleet, 2 combat tour, 1 diplomatic escort that she still described as the worst 6 weeks of her career. She had not spoken to Rourke in the first 4 hours after contact, which he understood. She did not trust diplomats. Most fleet officers did not. They considered diplomats a species of bureaucratic barnacle that attached itself to warships and made them slower. "Your assessment," she said. "They are waiting for us to speak first." That is not an assessment. That is a guess. It is an informed guess based on 31 years of reading the behavior of people who want something but will not ask for it. 17 ships, Captain. No weapons deployed, no hails sent, no movement. They positioned themselves directly in our corridor and stopped. If they wanted to fight, they had 11 hours to fire. If they wanted to flee, they had 11 hours to leave. They are doing neither. They are presenting. Vasic's jaw tightened. These are not people, Mr. Rourke. No, they are something that crossed interstellar space to sit in front of us and say nothing, which means either they have nothing to say, or they are waiting for us to demonstrate that we are worth talking to. One of those options requires us to act. And if the wrong action provokes them. Rourke turned from the rail and looked at her directly. He was 53 years old. He had spent the last 2 decades negotiating trade agreements, border disputes, resource allocations, and one hostage crisis that had ended with 3 people dead, and a commendation he had never been able to look at without feeling sick. He was not a first contact specialist. Nobody was. Humanity had never made first contact. There were no specialists. There was only him on this ship, because the Quiet Meridian had been running a routine diplomatic courier mission along the Kepler corridor when 17 impossible objects appeared in its path. "Captain, I am the only person on this ship whose entire career has been learning how to start a conversation. I am also the only person who has no authority to fire a weapon. If we are going to make a mistake, I would rather it be a diplomatic one." Vasic studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw, she did not share it. She nodded once and walked back to the command platform, and Rourke heard her voice, stripped of every inflection except command. "Comms, open a standard hailing channel. All frequencies. Mr. Rourke will transmit." He walked to the communications station. Lieutenant Ashad Devlin was already there, her fingers hovering over the broadcast console, her eyes wide with the particular expression of someone who understood that every second of this encounter would be studied for the next 1,000 years. She was young, 24, maybe 25. She had steady hands. "Wide beam," Rourke said. "Audio and data carrier, standard greeting protocol." "We don't have a standard greeting protocol for this, sir." "Then we make one. Transmit a mathematical sequence, prime numbers, 1 through 50. Repeat it 3 times, then pause. If they are listening, they will recognize the structure. If they respond, we go from there." Devlin's hands moved. The console hummed. The signal went out into the 40,000-kilometer gap between the Quiet Meridian and the 17 copper ovoids, carrying the oldest proof of intentional intelligence that mathematics could offer. The silence continued. Rourke stood at the console and waited. Behind him, the bridge crew held their positions with the rigid discipline of people trained to function under pressure, but he could feel the tension in the room like a physical substance, like humidity before a thunderhead. Every screen showed the same thing: 17 motionless vessels, broadcasting nothing, reflecting nothing, doing nothing. He counted his breaths the way he always did in the first minutes of a negotiation, slowly, deliberately, using the count as an anchor against the current of adrenaline that wanted to pull him into reaction. Reaction was the enemy of diplomacy. The man who reacted first lost the conversation. The man who waited, who watched, who measured the silence instead of filling it, that man held the room. He had learned this in his first posting, 29 years ago, sitting across a table from a trade representative who had spent the entire first hour saying nothing, while Rourke talked himself into 3 concessions he had not planned to make. He had never made that mistake again. The tactical officer, a broad-chested man named Halloran, ran his third full sensor sweep in 20 minutes. Rourke watched his reflection in the darkened auxiliary screen, watched Halloran's hands move with increasing precision, as if squeezing more resolution from the instruments would make the unknown become known. It would not. Some things did not yield to measurement. Some things yielded only to patience. 20 minutes passed, 30. At 38 minutes, Devlin spoke. "Sir, I am getting something on the tertiary band. Not a signal, more like a resonance, as if they are vibrating at a frequency just below our detection threshold and it is bleeding through. Can you isolate it?" Working on it, her fingers moved. "It is not data, it is harmonic, like they are humming." Rourke filed that, a species that hummed before speaking. A throat being cleared across 40,000 kilometers of vacuum. "Lieutenant, is the harmonic consistent or modulating?" "Modulating, slowly. The frequency is drifting upward in a logarithmic progression. If I extrapolate the curve, it will reach our primary detection band in approximately—" She paused, rechecked her calculations. 3 minutes. "They are tuning to us," Rourke said. "They started below our hearing and they are climbing into our range. That is not a probe. That is someone adjusting their volume so we can hear them." Vasek was listening. He could see it in the angle of her shoulders, the slight forward lean of someone who was hearing something that did not fit any category in her training, but that she recognized at a level deeper than training. "Or it is a targeting frequency climbing to weapons lock," she said. "If it were a weapon, they would not be climbing gradually. They would hit us with everything at once. Gradual means deliberate. Deliberate means intentional. Intentional means communicative." The harmonic crested into audible range. It was not a sound anyone on the bridge would forget. A low, sustained chord, not a single tone but 3 interwoven frequencies, each one pure and clean, each one holding a mathematical relationship to the others that Rourke's ear recognized before his mind could name it. A perfect fifth, and a major third and something else, a harmonic ratio that was not in any Western musical tradition, but that resonated in the bones nonetheless. It filled the bridge for 11 seconds, then faded. Nobody spoke. The chord hung in the air the way a sunrise hangs on the horizon, gone but still present, still coloring everything. "That was not a weapon," Devlin said quietly. At 41 minutes, every screen on the bridge went dark. Not a power failure. The overhead lights stayed on. The life support readouts continued. The engines hummed. But every display, every sensor feed, every tactical overlay went to black for exactly 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Rourke felt something he had not felt since the hostage crisis. The cold, unmistakable certainty that he was in the presence of something that could reach inside his ship and rearrange it at will. The screens came back. The sensor feeds returned. And on every display, overlaid on the tactical readout in symbols that no human had ever designed, a single image appeared. A geometric pattern of interlocking circles, each one containing a smaller pattern, each smaller pattern containing a still smaller one, recursing down to a scale the display could not resolve. The pattern pulsed once, twice, then it vanished. Halloran's voice was tight. They bypassed the firewall, the intrusion countermeasures, and the hardened kernel simultaneously. I did not detect a carrier signal. They did not connect to us, Captain. They were just inside. They are inside our systems, Vasek said. Her voice was flat with controlled fury. Devlin, isolate the... Captain, Rourke stepped between her and the tactical station. He did not raise his voice. He had learned decades ago that the most powerful word in a negotiation was the quietest one. They did not damage anything. They did not take anything. They showed us a pattern and they removed it. That is not an attack. That is an answer. An answer that required penetrating our entire network security without triggering a single alarm. Yes, which tells us two things. They are capable of actions we cannot prevent, and they chose to demonstrate that capability through a pattern rather than a weapon. In my experience, that is the behavior of someone establishing terms. Your experience is with human negotiation, Mr. Rourke. My experience is with power dynamics. And the first rule of every power dynamic I have ever witnessed is this. The party that shows what it can do without doing it is the one asking for a conversation, not a fight. Vasek held his gaze. The bridge was silent. He could hear Lieutenant Devlin breathing behind him, short, controlled breaths, the kind you take when you are afraid but functioning. He could hear Halloran's fingers hovering above his console, itching for something to scan, something to target, something to convert this unknown into a known quantity that his training could address. You have 1 hour, Vasek said. If anything else penetrates my systems, we go to combat posture and I pull us out. And the cloaked escorts. Her expression did not change. I will not confirm or deny the presence of additional fleet assets. Rourke did not press. He knew about the 2 Fenris-class destroyers holding position at 90,000 kilometers because he had read the mission brief. The classified section that attached a diplomatic courier should not have had clearance for, but that a 31-year veteran of the Foreign Service had access to through channels that predated Vasek's command by a decade. He would not mention them again. But he needed Vasek to know that he understood the stakes. If this went wrong, there were weapons in the dark that could turn the Convocation's 17 vessels into expanding clouds of superheated copper in the time it took to draw a breath. He turned back to the console. Devlin, transmit the same prime sequence again, but this time, after the 3rd repetition, add their pattern. Reproduce the interlocking circles as closely as our systems can render it. Send it back to them. Devlin stared at him. Sir, we don't know what that pattern means. We know it is theirs. Sending it back tells them we received it and we are paying attention. In every first meeting I have ever conducted, the most important thing you can do in the first 5 minutes is prove that you are listening. The signal went out. The prime sequence, repeated 3 times, followed by the best approximation of the alien geometric pattern that the Meridian's communications array could produce. It was crude. Rourke knew it was crude the way a child's drawing of a face is crude, recognizable in shape but stripped of every subtlety. But it was the effort that mattered, the willingness to try. He could feel the bridge watching him. Vasek at the command platform, her hands clasped behind her back, her weight centered over her feet like a boxer waiting for the bell. Halloran at tactical, running passive scans on a 5-second cycle, building a dataset on the alien vessels that he would never have time to analyze if they decided that conversation was over. Devlin beside him, her screens alive with frequency analysis, hunting for that sub-threshold hum she had detected, trying to pull meaning from a vibration she could barely hear. 8 minutes later, the 17 copper vessels moved. Not toward them, not away. They shifted formation, the ovoids rearranging themselves from a loose cluster into a precise geometric configuration that mirrored, in 3 dimensions, the interlocking circle pattern they had displayed on the meridian screens. Each vessel occupied a specific position, a specific angle, a specific distance from its neighbors, and the whole formation pulsed once with a coordinated emission of low-frequency light, a deep amber glow that rolled across all 17 hulls simultaneously and faded. Halloran read the sensor data in a voice stripped of everything except numbers. Formation diameter, 1,200 kilometers. Angular precision between vessels, consistent to 0.003 degrees. Light emission, coordinated to within 6 nanoseconds across all 17 hulls. 6 nanoseconds, across 1,200 kilometers, that was not communication. That was a single organism with 17 bodies. They are talking with their ships, Rourke said. The formation is the message. What is it saying? Vasek asked. I do not know yet, but it is saying it with 17 vessels acting as a single sentence, and that tells me their communication is collective, spatial, and probably non-verbal at its root. They do not speak the way we speak. They arrange things, they position, they compose. He was thinking out loud now, which he rarely did, which he had trained himself not to do in 3 decades of work where showing your reasoning was showing your weakness. But there was no playbook for this. There was no precedent. There was only the shape of what was happening and the shape of what he had spent his life learning, and he needed to find where those 2 shapes intersected before Vasek's 1-hour window closed, and the cloaked escorts turned this conversation into something that could not be undone. Devlin, can you map their formation? Give me relative positions, angles, distances between vessels. Already working on it, sir. Good. When you have it, I want you to display it beside the original pattern they showed us. I want to see if the formation is a 3-dimensional version of the 2-dimensional image. It was. Devlin had the overlay ready in 4 minutes, and when she projected both patterns side by side on the main display, the correspondence was unmistakable. The interlocking circles on the flat screen became interlocking orbital positions in 3-dimensional space. The recursion, the pattern within the pattern within the pattern, was present in both, the smaller vessels occupying positions that echoed the larger formation's geometry at a reduced scale. It is a fractal, Rourke said. Their language is fractal, the same structure at every scale. That is why they showed us the pattern first. It is their alphabet and their grammar simultaneously. The pattern does not mean something. The pattern is how things mean. Vasek was watching the display. The granite was still there, but behind it something was moving, the expression of a woman who had spent her career trusting instruments, and was now looking at something her instruments could describe but not explain. What do you want to do? She asked. There was something in her voice that had not been there an hour ago, not respect exactly, recognition. The recognition that the weapon she needed right now was not a railgun. I want to respond with our own formation. Move the meridian to a position that completes their pattern. If their geometry has an open position, a gap, I want us to fill it. You want me to fly my ship into the middle of an unknown alien formation. I want you to fly your ship into the position that says, I understand what you are doing and I choose to participate. That is the most powerful first sentence any diplomat has ever spoken. It says, I see you, I hear you, and I am not afraid. Are you afraid, Mr. Rourke? He was. The dread had been sitting in his chest like a stone since the first hour, a cold, dense weight that pressed against his ribs and made every breath a conscious decision. He had felt it before in the hostage crisis, in the darkened room where 3 people died because he said the wrong word at the wrong time, and the man with the weapon decided that words were finished. He had lived with that weight for 9 years. He had built a career on top of it. He had learned that dread was not the opposite of competence. It was the price of it. Yes, he said, But I have been afraid before, and I have learned that the alternative to fear is not courage. The alternative to fear is indifference, and indifference is the one thing we cannot afford right now." Vasek gave the order. The Meridian's engines came alive, a low vibration that climbed through the deck plates and into Rourke's bones. The ship moved, not fast, not aggressively. A slow, measured approach toward the formation, guided by Devlin's overlay, targeting the one position in the interlocking geometry that was empty, the gap where a vessel should be but was not. As they approached, the copper hulls resolved in greater detail. Each one was roughly 400 meters long, smaller than Rourke had expected, smaller than the Meridian itself. Their surfaces, which had appeared smooth at distance, were covered in fine engravings, patterns that echoed the interlocking circle fractal but varied from ship to ship, each hull carrying its own version of the shared geometry, the way 17 people might each write the same word in different handwriting. Some engravings were deep, cut into the copper with obvious age, the edges softened by time or transit. Others were fresh, sharp-edged, recently added. Rourke understood without being told that the engravings were a record, a history written on the skin of the ships themselves, each mark a moment, each variation a choice, the accumulation of 11,000 years of a civilization that wrote its story on its body. Range to nearest vessel, 900 kilometers, Halloran reported. 700, 500, 300. At 200 kilometers, the sub-threshold harmonic returned. The three-note chord, climbing from below audibility into the edge of hearing, softer this time, sustained, steady. A welcome, a held hand extended across the last distance. The bridge held its breath. Every hand was near a panel. Every eye was on the display. Rourke stood at the communications console and watched the copper hulls grow in the viewport, each one enormous at close range, the burnished surface scarred with fine markings that might have been script, or might have been the wear patterns of deep space transit, or might have been something he had no category for. 100 kilometers to position coordinates, Halloran said. 50, 20, 10. Vasek brought the ship to a stop at the precise coordinates Devlin had calculated. The Meridian sat inside the alien formation like a single new word, inserted into a sentence written in a language no human had ever read. And Rourke stood at the console with his hands flat on the surface, and his pulse beating in his throat and the dread in his chest, so heavy he thought it might crack his sternum. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then the formation changed. All 17 vessels rotated simultaneously, not on a shared axis, but each on its own axis, each at its own angle, each rotation part of a larger coordinated movement that swept through the formation like a wave. And as they rotated, their hulls shifted. The burnished copper surface of each vessel reconfigured, panels sliding, surfaces parting, and from within each hull a new layer emerged. A lattice of fine golden filaments, impossibly thin, covering every vessel in a web of light that pulsed in synchronized rhythm. The lattice connected. Filaments of light reached from vessel to vessel, threading through the spaces between them, and where they intersected they formed nodes of points of concentrated brightness that hung in the vacuum like small captured stars. The nodes arranged themselves into the fractal pattern, the interlocking circles, the recursive structure, but now it was not an image on a screen or a formation of ships. It was a living architecture of light, built from the spaces between the vessels, and the Meridian was now part of it. One of the light filaments touched the Meridian's hull. Every instrument on the bridge spiked. Not an alarm, nothing triggered the defensive systems, but every sensor registered the contact simultaneously, as if the ship itself had been touched on its skin and felt it. The filament clung to the hull for 3 seconds, pulsing, and in those 3 seconds every display flooded with data in no human notation, streams of symbols cascading faster than the eye could follow, dense and structured and rhythmic and utterly foreign. Halloran reported in clipped tones, "No damage, no system degradation. They are reading, not writing. passive scan. Extremely thorough. Then the filament withdrew, the data stopped, and on the main display in clear, precise English text, 4 words appeared. "We hear your numbers." The bridge went completely still. Rourke stared at the text. His throat was dry. His hands were shaking. He pressed them harder against the console to stop the tremor. "They learned English," Devlin whispered, "from 3 seconds of contact with our systems." "They did not learn it," Rourke said. His voice was steady despite everything. "They extracted it. The filament read our databases, linguistic archives, translation protocols, communication logs. Everything we have ever said to each other, they now know how to say." Vasek was on her feet. "That is a hostile intelligence action. That is a species that wanted to talk to us in our own language and took the fastest route to doing so. Captain, I understand the security implications, but consider what they just told us with those 4 words. They did not say surrender. They did not say identify yourselves. They said we hear your numbers. They acknowledged our first transmission. They told us they were listening. That is not hostility. That is courtesy. Courtesy that required accessing our entire network. Yes, and if we respond to that courtesy with weapons, we will never know what they wanted to say next, and we will spend the rest of our history wondering." Vasek stood absolutely still. Behind her, Halloran's hand hovered over the combat alert panel. The cloaked escorts waited in the dark beyond sensor range, Fenris-class teeth in the void, ready to bite. "Respond," Vasek said. Rourke turned to the console. He typed 4 words and transmitted them on the open channel. "We hear your pattern." The response came in 11 seconds. New text on the display in the same precise English, but with a cadence that was not quite human. The grammar correct but the rhythm strange, as if the words were being played on an instrument built for a different kind of music. "Your numbers were beautiful. Your pattern attempt was earnest. We value earnestness. We wish to speak AT length. We do not know your protocol for this. Please instruct US." Rourke read the message 3 times. The dread was still there, but something else was growing beside it, the feeling of a locked door showing him the shape of its key. "They are asking us to set the terms," he said. "They do not know our diplomatic protocols and they are asking us to teach them. They are ceding procedural authority to us." "Or they are pretending to," Vasek said. "Possibly, but a species that can penetrate our entire network in 3 seconds does not need to pretend to be subordinate. They are choosing to be deferential. That choice costs them nothing and tells us everything." Devlin leaned toward him, keeping her voice low. "Sir, while they were inside our systems, 3 seconds of access, they cataloged every human language in our database, all 14,000 living and extinct languages. They chose English because it is the one you were thinking in when you composed the prime sequence. They matched the language to the operator." Rourke absorbed that. 14,000 languages cataloged in 3 seconds. The operator identified, their cognitive language mapped, the response calibrated to the individual. He filed it beside everything else he had learned in the last hour. A species that communicated through spatial arrangement, that hummed in harmonic chords before speaking, that penetrated network security the way water penetrated cloth, not by force but by nature, and that chose courtesy over power at every decision point. He composed the next message. Every word would be studied for decades. In OUR protocol, first contact begins with an exchange of identity. We are the Terran fleet ship Quiet Meridian, representing the Terran Federation. We come in peace and wish to learn who you are. The response: we are the convocation of fixed stars. We have traveled to this region because we perceived your signal emissions 14 of your years ago and determined that a species capable of structured communication existed here. We have come to determine whether structured communication can become structured relation. We come in arrangement. Your word peace does not map precisely to our framework. Arrangement is the nearest equivalent. We value arrangement. We seek it actively. Rourke read the message to the bridge. He watched it land on each face. 14 years, Vasek said. They have been tracking us for 14 years. They have been traveling for 14 years, Rourke corrected. They detected us 14 years ago, decided we were worth meeting, and crossed interstellar space to have this conversation. That is not surveillance. That is commitment. It is also patience, Halloran said quietly. 14 years of travel to sit in front of us and ask how we prefer to talk. He looked at Rourke. It was the first time the tactical officer had looked at the diplomat with anything other than professional tolerance, and what was in his expression was not trust, but the beginning of the path that led to trust, the recognition that someone in the room understood something he did not. Rourke asked the next question before the weight of the last answer could settle too deeply into the crew. You say you come in arrangement. Can you define what arrangement means in your framework? Arrangement is the state in which each element occupies its correct position in relation to all other elements, and each element is aware of its position and consents to hold it. It is not imposed. It is chosen. It is not static. It evolves as new elements are included. It is not agreement. Elements may disagree profoundly and still hold their positions. Arrangement is the decision to remain in relation even when relation is difficult. Your CLOSESD concept is perhaps covenant, but covenant implies a contract. Arrangement implies a composition. We are not bound. We are composed. Vasek read the message from over Rourke's shoulder. He felt her presence there, the disciplined stillness of a woman processing information faster than she would ever let her face reveal. A composition, she said, like music. Like music, Rourke agreed. A piece of music in which every instrument chooses to play, and the conductor is the agreement to keep playing together. And they want us to pick up an instrument. They want to know if we want to pick one up. There is a difference. The next 4 hours were the most exhausting of Rourke's career. The convocation communicated in bursts, long, precise statements in their adapted English, each one dense with information, each one ending with a question or a request for clarification. They were methodical. They were careful. They were, Rourke began to understand, deeply concerned about making a mistake. At the 30-minute mark, they sent a message that made Halloran sit up straight at his console. We detect 2 additional vessels in your vicinity. They are employing electromagnetic concealment. We do not perceive this as hostile. We perceive it as prudent. A species that protects its speaker is a species that values speech. We honor this. Vasek's expression did not change, but Rourke saw her hands tighten behind her back. The cloaked escorts, the ones she would neither confirm nor deny, had been seen through as if their stealth technology were a window curtain. The convocation had noticed them, cataloged them, understood their purpose, and chosen to interpret their presence as a compliment rather than a threat. They had neutralized a military advantage and converted it into a diplomatic gesture in a single sentence. They know about the Fenris destroyers, Rourke said quietly, and they are telling us they do not care. Or they are telling us they can see through our best concealment and we should not try anything, Vasek said. Both readings are correct, Captain, and the fact that they delivered the information in a way that allows both readings is itself a diplomatic act. They are letting us keep our pride. They explained their nature in stages. The convocation was not a government or a military. It was a religious order, the closest translation they offered, though they noted that religious was imprecise, and that they had spent 900 years debating the correct term among their own member species. They were a collective of 17 distinct biological forms, unified by a shared cosmological framework that understood the universe as a vast arrangement of fixed positions, each position carrying meaning the way a note in a chord carries meaning, only in relation to the others. Their ships were not vessels in the human sense. They were positions made mobile at points in a cosmic geometry that had chosen to relocate in order to include a new element. The new element was humanity. At the 70-minute mark, Rourke asked, "How did you detect our signal emissions from such a distance?" "Your electromagnetic emissions propagate outward from your star at the speed of light. 14 of your years ago, the expanding sphere of your emissions reached a threshold station of the convocation. The threshold keeper on that station recognized structured intentional communication, not random noise, not stellar phenomenon, but language. The keeper convened the convocation. 17 species deliberated for 41 of your days. The decision to travel here was unanimous." "Unanimous," Devlin murmured. 17 different species, and the vote was unanimous. Rourke filed that alongside everything else. A collective that reached unanimous decisions across 17 species in 41 days. That was either an extraordinarily functional governance structure or an extraordinarily controlled one. He would need to learn which. At the 90-minute mark, Rourke asked a question that had been forming since the first exchange. "You have identified yourselves as a collective of 17 species. Are all 17 species represented in this formation?" "We are each one vessel per species. Each vessel carries a threshold keeper, the individual designated to speak on behalf of their species in matters of inclusion. 17 threshold keepers are present. They are waiting. They have been waiting for your species to produce a threshold keeper of your own. We believe you are that individual." Rourke read the message twice. The dread in his chest shifted, not heavier, sharper. The dread of a man who understands that he is not being invited to a conversation, but being identified as the only person in the room who can have it. "I am a diplomatic attaché," he transmitted. "I do not have the authority to speak for my species." "We understand authority. We do not require it. A threshold keeper is not an authority. A threshold keeper is a listener, the first one to hear. Authority comes later from your people in your way. We ask only that someone listen first. We believe you are the one who will listen." Vasek was at his shoulder. She had read the message. "They are asking you to be their point of contact." "They are asking me to be humanity's point of contact." "There is a difference." "The practical difference is zero, Mr. Rourke. You will be receiving information that no one else has, forming impressions that no one else can verify, and making judgments that will shape every subsequent decision. That is not listening. That is leading. It is the part of leading that comes before the part you recognize, Captain. The part where you sit in a room and let someone talk and try not to decide what they mean before they finish saying it." At the 2-hour mark, the exchange took a turn that sharpened the dread from a dull weight to a blade edge. He had asked about the convocation's history with species that were warlike or hostile by nature. "We have encountered such species. 43 times in OUR history, we have made threshold contact with a civilisation that responded with violence. In every case, we WITHDRW. We did not retaliate. We did not defend. We WITHDRW, and we left the position open, and we waited. In 11 of those cases, the species eventually returned to communication. The others remain open positions." "You do not defend yourselves?" Vasek asked from over Rourke's shoulder. The convocation replied, as if they had heard her directly. "We do not need to defend. This is not a boast. It is a description. The arrangement operates at a scale and on axes that physical weaponry cannot affect. A species that fires on our vessels destroys matter. Our positions are not matter. Our arrangement is not located in the physical space your weapons can reach. Destroying a vessel is like burning a page of music. The composition continues. The notes remain. Only the paper is gone." Halloran sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. the sound of a man who had just been told that everything he had spent his career learning to threaten was a category of irrelevance. At the 2.5-hour mark, Rourke asked the question he could not avoid any longer. In our experience, when a more powerful entity seeks contact with a less powerful one, the purpose is usually to establish dominance, extract resources, or impose conditions. What do you want from us? The response took 14 minutes, the longest pause in the exchange. When it came, it was the longest single message they had sent. Your question reveals your framework. You understand relation as transactional. We do not criticize this. It is a recognition of your developmental position. Your species is young. What we want is this. We want to offer you a position, not a subordinate position, not a conditional position. A fixed position in the arrangement that is equal to every other position, carrying the same weight and the same voice. We do not conquer. We do not extract. We arrange. The universe is more complete when every voice is included, and your voice is missing from OUR arrangement. The cost of inclusion is this. You must consent, freely, without coercion. We will wait as long as your species requires. We waited 14 years to arrive. We will wait 14 more, or 1,400, or 14,000. We ask only one thing, that one among you listen to the full TERMS, so that your decision is informed. Will you listen? Rourke read the message 4 times. He printed a hard copy and handed it to Vasek. She read it twice. They want someone to receive a briefing, she said. They want someone to hear the full proposal before humanity decides. They are asking for a listener. We do not have an ambassador for this. We have a mid-level diplomatic attaché on a courier run. We have me. She looked at him. You. I am here. I am qualified to listen, and they are offering to wait 14,000 years if the answer is no. In 31 years of diplomatic work, I have never encountered a negotiating party that offered to wait 14,000 years. That is not leverage. That is sincerity on a scale I do not have a framework for. At the 3-hour mark, the convocation asked the question Rourke had been dreading since the exchange began. We wish to share the full terms of what inclusion means. This requires a form of communication more complete than text. We call it threshold communion. It is a direct transfer of structured understanding, not words, not data, but comprehension itself. It will not alter you. It will not compel you. It will inform you fully and without omission, so that your species' decision is made in complete knowledge. Will you consent to receive? Rourke read it. He read it again. He felt the dread contract into something hard and specific. The dread of a man standing at a door that opens both ways. They want to transmit directly into my mind, he said to Vasek. Absolutely not. Captain, I will not allow a foreign intelligence to conduct a direct neural interface with any member of this crew. That is not a diplomatic action. That is a cognitive security threat of the highest order. They said it will not alter me. They also said they come in arrangement, not peace. Their promises are articulated in a framework we do not understand, using concepts we cannot verify. I will not risk you. She turned to Halloran. Tactical assessment. Halloran hesitated, the first time Rourke had seen the man hesitate since the encounter began. Captain, if they wanted to harm Mr. Rourke or anyone else on this ship, they have demonstrated the capacity to access our systems at will. They could have introduced hostile code during the 3-second network penetration. They could have disabled life support during the harmonica mission. They could have done anything at any point in the last 5 hours, and we would not have been able to prevent it. Whatever threat they pose, it is not the kind I can mitigate with the tools I have. Vasek absorbed that. Her expression did not change, but her hands shifted behind her back, the unconscious gesture of a commander recalculating a battle she could not win with the weapons at her disposal. You are telling me we are defenseless. I am telling you that defense is not the relevant category, Captain. They are not attacking. They are offering. And I do not have a protocol for shooting down an offer. Rourke looked at her. Something in that earlier sentence was different. Not I will not risk my crew. Not I will not risk the mission. I will not risk you. Captain, with respect, you are not risking me. I am choosing to be risked. That is a distinction that matters, and it matters especially now, because the convocation just told us that their concept of a threshold keeper is someone who chooses to listen. Not someone who is ordered to. Someone who chooses. Vasek was silent for a long time. Halloran watched from the tactical station, his hand no longer near the combat alert panel, but resting flat on the console, the posture of a man who had stopped reaching for a weapon, because he had realized the fight was not the kind he was trained for. Devlin, Vasek said. Full biometric monitoring on Mr. Rourke. Neural activity, cardiac function, cortisol, adrenaline, blood oxygen. If any reading spikes beyond safe parameters, I terminate the connection by any means necessary. Yes, Captain. Vasek looked at Rourke. 1 hour, not a second more. Agreed. He transmitted the answer, 2 words. We consent. The filaments of light reached for the meridian again, but this time they did not penetrate the hull. They gathered around it, forming a sheath of golden light that enclosed the ship in a luminous cocoon. Inside the cocoon, the light pulsed in patterns that Rourke's eyes could follow but his mind could barely process. And with the patterns came meaning, not through the text on the screen, not through translated words, but directly the way music carries meaning, the way a sunset carries meaning, through a channel that bypassed language and arrived at comprehension without stopping at vocabulary. He saw the convocation's history, not as narrative but as structure, a vast architecture of positions and relationships, each member species a fixed point in a geometry that had been growing for 11,000 years. He saw the founders, a race of beings whose biology was built on crystalline lattices that resonated with electromagnetic fields, their bodies singing with frequencies the way his body hummed with blood. He saw them reach out to the second species, and the third, and the fourth, each contact a negotiation conducted with the same patience. Decades of waiting, centuries when necessary, the same question asked and re-asked until the answer came freely. He saw species that had refused, 7 refusals in 11,000 years. The convocation had honored every one. No invasion, no coercion, no return uninvited. The refusals were marked in the geometry as empty positions, gaps in the pattern where a voice should be but was not, and the convocation carried those gaps as a choir carries silence, as part of the music. He saw what inclusion meant, not assimilation, not submission, not the erasure of identity or the subordination of culture. Inclusion meant taking a position in the arrangement and holding it, contributing your unique perspective to a collective framework that grew richer with every new voice. The species within the convocation retained their individuality entirely. Distinct civilizations, distinct cultures, distinct governments, distinct conflicts. But they shared a cosmological grammar, a way of understanding how their individual perspectives related to each other, and that grammar was the convocation itself. He saw the cost. To be included was to be visible. To be visible was to be known. To be known was to be accountable, not to a government or an authority, but to the arrangement itself, to the collective understanding that your position mattered and your silence was felt. Every species in the convocation knew every other species as they truly were, not curated, not filtered through translation and protocol and strategic omission. They knew each other completely. And they chose, every day, to maintain the arrangement despite that knowledge, despite knowing, despite seeing the worst of each other alongside the best. That was the cost, not a transaction, a willingness. He saw the rituals. Each member species maintained its own method of worship, its own understanding of what the arrangement meant, and the convocation protected those differences with a ferocity that surprised him. a founding principle, shown to him in a burst of geometric clarity. The arrangement is not agreement. The arrangement is the decision to hold a position even when you disagree with every other position around you, because the music requires all the notes, especially the dissonant ones. And Rourke saw what that meant for humanity. If they accepted, the convocation would know them. Every war, every genocide, every act of cruelty and cowardice and failure, laid bare before 17 species that would see humanity as it truly was, without the diplomatic filters and the curated histories and the carefully constructed narratives that every civilization builds to explain itself to strangers. The dread became something immense, not paralyzing, clarifying, the dread of absolute exposure, the dread of being seen. But inside the dread, like a vein of ore inside rock, was something else, because the communion was not one-directional. He was also seeing them. 17 species with their own atrocities, their own failures, their own chapters that they carried as scar tissue. A founding species that had nearly annihilated itself in a resource war before the first arrangement was proposed. A species that had committed a genocide 4,000 years ago and still carried it as a marker in their position. Not hidden, not excused, but held visibly as part of who they were. They were not perfect. The convocation was not a utopia. It was a discipline, an arrangement maintained through effort, honesty, and the stubborn collective decision to keep the music playing even when the notes were dissonant. The last thing the communion showed him was the gap. His gap, humanity's position. He saw it from the perspective of the arrangement itself, a sense of the entire geometry at once, the way a musician hears a chord. And in the chord, one note was missing, an absence that the chord shaped itself around, the way a river shapes itself around a stone it has not yet encountered. The gap was not demand, it was desire. The convocation wanted humanity the way a choir wants a voice it has never heard but knows is supposed to be there. And the wanting was patient, and the patience was structural, and the structure was faith. Rourke felt the gap, and the gap felt like him, like the empty space inside him where the hostage crisis lived, like every conversation he had ever entered carrying the weight of knowing that words could kill and choosing to speak anyway. The communion lasted 47 minutes. When the light sheath withdrew and the displays cleared, Rourke was standing at the console with tears on his face and hands that were perfectly steady, and a chest full of something that was no longer dread, but was not yet acceptance. It was the threshold between the two, the space where understanding lived before decision caught up to it. He became aware of the bridge around him again, the hum of the engines, the soft clicks of consoles, the breathing of 23 crew members who had been watching their instruments and watching him for 47 minutes. The light sheath had been visible from every viewport. Halloran told him later that the crew had pressed against the observation ports on every deck, watching the golden glow pulse around the Meridian's hull, watching the Diplomat stand motionless at the communications console with his eyes open, and his tears falling in the way tears fall in low-gravity sections, slowly, floating slightly before they struck the deck. None of them had spoken. Not one voice in 47 minutes. Something about the light, something about the way it pulsed with a patience that was visible, that could be felt through the hull plates, that communicated without words a single clear truth. This is not an attack. This is a gift being given to someone who asked for it. Devlin was reading her biometric displays. Neural activity elevated but stable. Cortisol peaked at minute 23 and then declined. No indicators of cognitive interference or compulsion. He is intact, Captain. Vasek was at his shoulder. Report. He told her, all of it. He did not omit and he did not soften and he did not frame it in diplomatic language designed to make the edges smooth. He told her about the history and the geometry and the communion and the cost. And when he finished, the bridge was silent in the way a room is silent when everyone in it is rebuilding their understanding of reality from the foundation up. They want us to be seen, Vasek said slowly. All of us as we are. Yes. And they are willing to be seen in return, with their own failures visible. Yes. That is not a diplomatic offer, Mr. Rourke. That is an existential one. Yes. And you believe they are sincere. Rourke looked at the formation outside the viewport. The 17 vessels pulsed with their golden lattice, patient, the same way they had been patient for 14 years, the same way they would be patient for 14,000 more. Captain, I have spent 31 years reading people. I have read liars and con artists and sincere men and desperate women and politicians who believed their own lies so thoroughly that they had become a form of truth. I have a calibrated instinct for deception, and it is the only professional skill I trust without reservation. And I have never encountered anything as sincere as what I just experienced. Not once, not in 31 years. He paused, which terrifies me, because sincerity at this scale is either the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed or the most sophisticated deception I cannot detect, and I do not know which. Vasek looked at the formation for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him, the most human thing she had said since the encounter began, the first visible crack in the granite. How do you decide then, when you cannot tell if it is real? You decide based on what kind of species you want to be, not what you know about them, what you know about yourself. Vasek was quiet, then she nodded. Draft the message. Tell them we need time. Tell them we are not refusing. Tell them we need to take this home to our people, to our governments and our arguments and our fears and our slow, messy, human process of deciding things together. Tell them we heard them. And tell them. She stopped, her jaw worked. The granite cracked a fraction further. Tell them their numbers were beautiful too. Rourke typed the message. He chose every word with the care of a man setting stones in a wall that would stand for centuries. We have heard your full proposal. We do not refuse. We do not yet accept. We are a species that decides collectively, and this decision belongs to all of us. We ask for time. We understand that you have offered to wait, and we accept that offer with gratitude. We will return to our people and present what we have learned. When we have decided, we will find you. Your numbers were beautiful too. He transmitted. The response came in 4 seconds, the fastest reply of the entire encounter. We will be in our position. Positions do not move. When you are ready, you will know where to find us. The arrangement waits with patience that has no ending. Your earnestness has been noted. Your fear has been honored. Your silence would have been honored equally. We are grateful that you chose words. The golden lattice pulsed once, a single synchronized wave of light that passed through all 17 vessels and through the meridian itself, a warmth that Rourke felt in his bones, not heat but presence, not force but acknowledgement. Then the lattice dimmed. The filaments withdrew. The copper hulls sealed, surfaces returning to that burnished, featureless finish. The formation held for 30 seconds. Then, with no visible acceleration, no drive flare, no transit flash, the 17 vessels simply were not there. One frame they existed, the next they did not. The space where they had been was empty and dark, and the quiet meridian sat alone in it. A single diplomatic frigate with its running lights pale against the void. Halloran ran 3 sweeps. No trace. No quantum displacement, no spatial folding artifacts, no tachyon scatter. By every instrument we have, they were never here. They were here, Rourke said. The logs prove it. The bridge was silent. The kind of silence that follows a thunderclap when the air is still ringing but the sound has stopped. Vasek stood at the command platform and looked at the empty void for a full minute. The granite was cracked, but the foundation held. She was, Rourke understood, a woman who would carry this encounter the way a soldier carries a wound, with discipline and without complaint. and with the private understanding that she would never be the same person she was before. Stand down, combat readiness. Signal the escorts to decloak and form up on our starboard quarter. Helm, set course for Kepler Station, best speed. The Fenris-class destroyers decloaked 3 minutes later, two angular predators materializing out of the dark, their stealth fields dissipating like fog under sunlight. The TFS Iron Veil and the TFS Constant Vigil, each one bristling with the kind of armament that made civilizations reconsider their foreign policy. They had been ready from the first second, and none of it had mattered. Rourke watched them take position on the Meridian's flanks and felt something he did not expect: pity, not for the destroyers or their crews, for the assumption the destroyers represented, that the opening word between civilizations would be either a weapon or the threat of one. The convocation had sent 17 unarmed positions because their framework did not include it. Devlin appeared at his elbow. "Sir, I want you to know that I recorded everything. The logs are triple redundant and time-stamped to nanosecond precision. Whatever you write, the data will support it." "Thank you, Lieutenant. There is one other thing. During the communion, your neural patterns showed something I have never seen in any baseline human reading. Your brain was processing information across 12 simultaneous channels. The normal human maximum is 3. You were not damaged by it. Your patterns returned to baseline within 4 minutes. But for those 47 minutes, you were thinking in a way that no human being has ever thought before." Devlin nodded. Then she said very quietly, "It was beautiful, sir. Whatever you saw, the biometric data was beautiful." She left. Rourke stood at the rail for another moment. Then he went to find his quarters. "Mr. Rourke," Vasek's voice stopped him at the bridge hatch. He turned. "I need you to write a report, the most precise document you have ever written. The people who read it will decide the future of our species based on what you put on that page. Can you do it?" Rourke looked at the empty space where the convocation had been. Somewhere in it, in a position that did not move, 17 vessels were waiting with a patience that had no ending for a species that had only just learned the word arrangement. "I have been writing that report since the moment they arrived," he said. "I just did not know it yet." He left the bridge and walked the 3 decks down to his quarters in silence. His quarters were small: a fold-down desk, a chair that did not fold, a viewport that showed the same stars without the overlay of tactical data. He sat at the desk and stared at the viewport for 20 minutes without moving. He thought about the hostage crisis. 9 years ago, the trade negotiation that collapsed into a standoff. The man named Gareth Voss who produced a weapon and took 3 hostages. 4 hours of talking through a closed door. 3 hours and 57 minutes of the right words. And then the wrong word, a single syllable at a single wrong angle in a single wrong moment. Voss had fired. 3 people died. Rourke had entered the room and seen them. For 9 years that moment had lived in his chest like a cold stone. He had built his career around it, using it as ballast, the weight that kept him cautious, that made him measure every word with the precision of a man diffusing ordnance. And now he understood why the convocation had seen in him what they needed. Not a hero, not a brave man, a careful one. A man who knew the cost of a wrong word because he had paid it, who would weigh every syllable of their proposal with the dread of someone who knew that words could kill, and that the only people qualified to speak across the void were the ones who had learned that lesson in blood. He opened a blank file on his personal terminal. He wrote the first line. "The silence had been going on for 11 hours when I decided it was deliberate." And then he kept writing. He wrote about the dread and the way it transformed. He wrote about Vasek's granite face cracking open just enough to let 4 words through. Their numbers were beautiful too, and how those 4 words contained more courage than any order she had ever given. He wrote about Halloran's hand moving away from the combat panel, centimeter by centimeter, as the hours passed, and the threat assessment in his mind was overwritten by something his training had no category for. He wrote about 17 vessels that had traveled 14 years to ask one question and wait for the answer. He wrote about the gap in the pattern, the position, the size and shape of humanity, not an absence but an invitation, not a hole but a chair left empty at a table where everyone was already seated, pulled out slightly, waiting. The report took him 9 hours. When he finished, it was the most precise document he had ever written and the most honest. He read it once, changed nothing, and sent it to Vasek with a single annotation, for transmission to Terran Federation Command. Priority, existential. Then he turned to the viewport. The stars were still there. The void was still dark. Somewhere in it, a position that did not move held 17 patient vessels in a geometry that had been growing for 11,000 years, and somewhere in that geometry, a gap the size and shape of humanity waited to be filled or to remain empty, and both outcomes were honored equally. Callan Rourke sat in his small cabin and looked at the stars and felt, for the first time in 9 years, that the weight in his chest was not a punishment. It was a qualification. The arrangement was patient. He had learned at last to be patient too. He closed his eyes and let the silence hold. The silence was full of everything that had not yet been said, and everything that might be, and the quiet hum of a universe still composing itself, one voice at a time. He would carry the weight. He had always carried it. The difference was that now he knew what it was for.